Hey, everybody. Welcome to SIC Talks number 61. This is the weekly conversation I have as a companion to the SIC Weekly newsletter, which goes out on Thursdays and where you're probably watching this video since it's embedded. But if you're finding it on YouTube or you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple or wherever, welcome. I do this conversation with somebody that I find interesting every week to both understand a little bit more about what their world is like and then also to give context to some of the stories that I think are interesting in my world, which are highlighted in the newsletter. And so we'll go through and we'll refer to a few of those. But my guest today is Aaron Rose, who, as I said earlier in a technical difficulty marred first take of this conversation, shall we say, or attempted first take, what has been somebody who I have known about for a long time, since probably, the early mid 90s when he ran Alleged Gallery in New York, but has also been a kind of a hero from afar, an inspiration, a North Star, and just generally somebody who I think is creatively fascinating. And so I want to welcome Aaron Rose. Aaron, how are you?
I'm good. It's nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah, I'm glad it's working this time. So
Well,
far, so good.
I mean, like I said to you before, it's like the as long as we can remain firmly in the podcast amateur zone, I think we can feel not too bad about it. So
No. Always stay amateur.
Where do I find you today? Where are you in the world?
In Los Angeles, at my house in Hollywood.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm at home in Greenpoint as well, over on the other side. So I was reflecting. So I was listening to you on the Weirder Together podcast appearance that you made a month or so ago, and watching some videos on Instagram, just kind of setting the stage for the conversation. And I was reminded of the first time I probably heard your name, which it must have been late 90s when you were doing Alleged, but prior to ever visiting Alleged or prior to ever meeting there. I made it once to Washington Street, but never to any of the other galleries. And it's been interesting because that's how I know you as a gallerist and as an art curator and that sort of thing. But you have also, over the course of time, taken on this very polymathic, as you said, arc, which has meant you have been a writer, you've been a curator, you've been a director, you've been a musician, you've been a performer, and now with the publication of this book, you're a published poet. Maybe I don't know if you were a published poet before or not, but you certainly are now.
Yes.
But in a weird way, it's come full circle because the poems were written around the time of Alleged's founding and your arrival to New York. Is that right? What's the kind of, give me a little bit of background if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I arrived in, I grew up in LA in the suburbs, and I arrived in New York in early 1989. I was playing in a band, which very rapidly split up. I think we were in New York about 3 months and the band broke up.
Oh, wow. Okay, gotcha.
And so I was just kind of lost, floating around for a number of years, working random retail jobs and kind of half homeless. Not really in the best place, but I was loving New York a lot. I loved being there. Yeah. I did. It was definitely the place I needed to be at that moment. But I had a lot of time on my hands, and so I wrote a lot. I used poetry as a time waster, kind of. I mean, I was serious about it, but it was just something to do.
Well, it's funny because when I asked. Separately, I was just like, were you trying to be a poet? Because one of the things that I love about the conceit of this book is that I, in that time, also used to just write down dumb stuff, but it was, I always understood it as dumb stuff. It was never, like, you could call it poetry, but it never aspired to poetry. It was just dumb stuff.
Right. I mean, I was 19 years old, so I'm not going to say that it was dumb stuff. It's still dumb stuff, what I mean? But I did spend a lot of time at St. Mark's Books back when St. Mark's Books was a thing, and they had quite an extensive poetry section there. And they were actually very involved in kind of the East Village, Lower East Side poetry scene. So I was paying attention to kind of what was happening in that world. So, I wasn't completely naive. It wasn't just dumb stuff, but I wasn't like aspiring to be Kerouac or anything like that. It was really just, there was no destination. I just felt like it was something to make,
It's funny. I'm just looking up on my phone here the St. Mark's books, because I don't think it's St. Mark's Books, but there was a bookstore on St. Mark's 2 doors over from what used to be Kim's Video that my son took me to a high school hardcore show at a couple of months ago. Headlined by the inimitably named Child Labor, who are buddies of his. But it was funny to be back on St. Mark's, to be listening to like a band with a dumb name doing the thing that I grew up on in Syracuse, like the sort of hardcore matinee equivalent or whatever it is.
St. Mark's will always do that, though. St. Mark's is like, that's like, it's stamped, it's branded. That's what St. Mark's.
I look, God, I hope so. I mean, it's funny because it's like, given the arc of change in the city in particular, it is easy to imagine how it just sort of blinks out of existence, unfortunately. And so it's not, it was reifying to be there and to see that thing happen again.
That's cool. Yeah.
But it reminded me that the DIY nature of it reminded me a lot of the energy that I associated with the art that you brought into Alleged and platformed and have championed ever since, and perhaps kind of do yourself. I've read I read the what is it? Would you call it a memoir? What is that book that you wrote a few years ago? What do you refer to it as?
There have been a lot. The one that was specifically about Alleged Gallery,
maybe. I'm gonna like climb the bookshelf in a second and find it.
Young, Sleek, and Full of Hell.
That's the one. One.
Italian publisher called Drago put out in
excellent book, by the way. Readers, go look for it.
Yeah, it's kind of rare now, but
oh wow,
we did that right when the gallery closed in 2001, 2002, because we thought it was important to get everybody's memories down while they still had them.
Yeah, sure.
Get that story told immediately, because we knew that things would start fading. So it's a pretty accurate representation of what went down.
It's funny you should say that. Like, and I think this is a big topic that I notice, a big pattern of discussion recently. We had the resurgence. I know you have children, but it's like the resurgence of the style, the attitude, the curiosity, the sort of spirit of those moments in the current seems to be really strong. Partially, I think, because the last 20 years, things have moved so fast that it's the last sort of era that we sort of fully remember in a lot of ways. And so it's interesting that at that moment you had the impulse to go, this is ephemeral. We better get it on paper or it's going to go away.
Yeah. Brendan Fowler, who is an artist, musician, all around incredible person. He now goes by the name B Fowler. He was my employee at the gallery, and it was really his impetus to do it that way. Like he conducted all the interviews in the book.
Wow, cool.
And I have to give him a lot of credit for saying, like, we got to do it now. It needs to be, documented, not when it's a bunch of like old people trying to remember, back in the day,
Fully.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, right? And it's part of what I have always wanted to talk to you about is the extent to which you have been able to say, or any of us is able to say, in the moment, this is significant, or this is going to be significant.
Yeah.
And whether or not I'm recording it, whether or not I'm, creating it, I'm recognizing that. Were you in those moments able to kind of go, where I'm going to make I'm making contributions here that are going to change Ben Dietz's life in Syracuse or whatever it was?
I mean, early on, of course not. I mean, early on, you're just trying to, I mean, kind of all the way through, but especially early on, you're just trying to keep the lights on, right? I mean, you're just trying to pay the power bill and eat bagels and, get through. But then you start to notice patterns and opportunities, starting to come up that are not normal for your average, small underground art gallery in New York. These were exceptional opportunities. So you start to realize, okay, like there obviously there's some resonance here, that global resonance that really goes well beyond whatever we're making in this storefront on Ludlow Street. There was like something cultural happening that we just kind of like, it was like lightning in the bottle. We were just in the right place at the right time.
Sure.
You can't manufacture.
Well, I mean, you were and you weren't. Let's be honest. I mean, I don't know that you would know this, but every Wednesday I organize a breakfast in Williamsburg, and it's a sort of an open invite, anybody can turn up type thing, and so consequently topics bounce around a lot. But we were talking about the idea of scenius this morning. Are you familiar with the term scenius?
No.
Okay, so I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's a Kevin Kelly term, but it's a portmanteau of scene and genius. And it describes these nodes in history or in cultural history where scenes have developed and have like overproduced in terms of great ideas or, cultural impact or whatever the case is. And one of the classic examples that I've seen used is CBGB's in 1977, Blondie, Ramones, television, Talking Heads, etc. But the interesting thing about it is that one of the components is historical context. One of the components is location. One of the components is macro conditions. One of the components in that case is the shape of the room. Literally, the fact you have to walk in, you have to walk past the stage, get to the bathrooms, you have to see the pool table, all this sort of stuff. And it forced people together in a way that created conversation. But behind all of that, there are people, right? And so for you to say you're in the right place at the right time, in a certain respect, underplays your role specifically in saying, I'm going to create the venue or I'm going to bring people together or whatever the case is. Don't you think?
Yes and no. I mean, the fact that we were in New York City,
fair,
had a big effect on our influence, but one of the things that I started to realize as we started doing more and more work and, meeting more and more people around the world were that there were small venues all over the world that were thinking just like us.
Yeah.
That we didn't know about, that we only found out about through, however someone knew someone or met someone or whatever. So what was happening at Alleged Gallery wasn't in a vacuum. There were little like gurgles of energy all, there was like people in London, there were people in Paris, there were people in LA, there were people in Chicago, there were people, all in Japan, like they were all doing this kind of stuff. But there was no network. And I think that the fact that we were in New York, not to downplay it, but like the fact that we were in New York and that was such a global hub of culture, what we did was elevated to a certain level because of our location.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Well, and speaking of elevating, I mean, I think it was one of those things where it was like it was the first time, maybe not the first, no, it probably was the first time. Let's credit where credit's due. It was probably the first time that I ever saw a skateboard hung on a gallery wall as something other than the thing you were about to bolt to trucks and head off down the street with, right? It was the first time that I saw like that post skate graffiti universe venerated as art. Was any of that, like, calculated is the wrong word, but was any of that based in foresight, or was that just like, these are my friends, I have this opportunity, I want to put them on the wall kind of thing?
It was a combination, actually, because they were my friends, not everybody, but I did have friends from growing up in LA that were part of that community, albeit not as famous as some of the artists that we ended up, showing at Alleged in in New York, but I did recognize after spending time in Lower Manhattan, there was a small, very dedicated and very core skate scene in New York, but
Yeah.
nothing compared to what was happening on the West Coast.
In LA, yeah, sure.
Yeah, in LA and San Francisco. So I was aware of the novelty of hanging a skateboard on the wall in New York City, and how it would
Interesting.
have
Okay.
almost like an artifact. It's an artifact of a different culture, and then have more meaning than if I had hung that same skateboard on a wall in Santa Monica.
Sure.
So there was something about putting it in New York City that gave it like the zoom out, that people could look at it as anthropological in some way.
Wow, that's really yeah. That's fascinating, and it also it precedes a lot of what is now actual skate anthropology, or
Yes.
or archaeology, whatever the case may be. It's interesting, actually. I don't, and we use this as a bridge to transition to some of the stories this week. One of the stories that is in the newsletter, and I don't know if it's in the version that I sent you as a preview, but is called the Ollie edition. It's the why is this interesting newsletter, which publishes every day. And today they republished an article from 2002 about the history of Ollie Gelfand, the guy that invented the Ollie in South Florida and Florida's roller skate scene, so on and so forth. Anyway, but it's a 22-year-old piece about a thing that happened 24 years before that. Right. And I read it in the same way as my son last night was reading about Jackson Pollock for his, theory of knowledge class in high school. And that was really fascinating. So I love the idea that you're like, the juxtaposition creates this anthropological implication.
Yeah, I saw that it would be interesting to a New York audience because it wasn't common,
Yeah.
And therefore I thought, oh, well, this would be an interesting show to mount, because most New Yorkers had never been exposed to that culture.
Sure. Is that how you approach a sort of a curatorial challenge? Is basically, how do you present the thing that would be unexpected, or is there some other sort of
vector? I think so. Yeah, I think so. I've never been a big fan of oh man, what's the word? Sorry, my brain is a little bit fried today. Preaching to the converted. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of preaching. I think that's what most people do nowadays. I think that's kind of what our culture is, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's explainer culture to a certain extent. It's like repeating a thing you already know, but sort of reifying your understanding of it.
Yeah, like in a different colorway. But I don't. I've never.
Shout out Nike Dunks.
Yeah. But yeah, I've never been interested in that. I've never been interested. Okay. I've always been, for myself too, like as a way for me to grow as a creative person. I prefer to explore the unknown rather than recycle the same old trope.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's another interesting sort of segue into the newsletter, because I will leave you. I will make one other comment, one other observation about the podcast appearance with Ben Lee and Ione Skye, was that you said you were really fascinated by AI, and I associate you, rightly or wrongly, much more in this analog tradition, right? For in all of your different sort of creative formats. And so when you said that, I wasn't surprised exactly, but I was excited, because I was just like, oh, cool. I'm really interested to see what Aaron finds fascinating about that universe, what he's messing around with, where he sees pitfalls, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder, was there anything in, the newsletter, or generally speaking in the news recently, that you've looked at through that lens and gone, oh, this sounds really interesting?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I think I understand why you would associate me and my work, and other people too, with kind of like an analog DIY culture, because it's been where probably the most things have been published in terms of books and magazine articles and exhibitions and things like that.
Well, and I follow your paintings, and I buy your T-shirts, and I do, all that kind of stuff too.
for sure. Yeah. And I definitely feel that the human hand, the more digitized our culture becomes, the more important I've seen the human hand actually become, more elevated in our culture, because I feel it's a human need to feel that mistake, that perfect mistake that only a hand can make, but at the same time, like I've been, I've been making films now for 15, almost 20 years. And it's not like I'm using an old, you know, zoetrope, you know what I mean? And like a crank camera. I
Right.
like to work on like the most technologically advanced film cameras that are out there.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I'm not afraid of technology. I think technology is fascinating, but it's just a tool. It's not a god,
Yeah. Well,
And that's how I look at it. It's just another tool,
Yeah, I thought that was a really useful distinction. The notion of, or maybe not useful distinction, but an interesting observation, which was like those of us who came out of a DIY sort of milieu or moment in time. It's this constant discussion of what's available to us that we can use in whatever way we want to get to the place that we want to get to, as opposed to going like, oh my God, there are markers with paint that come out of them. What are the brush people going to do now type thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Or like, analog only, But I love, there's a bunch of kids that are really into that right now. And I think that's great, but it's like, you're kind of shooting your own foot.
I agree wholeheartedly. I produced a photo shoot a couple of years ago where, unbeknownst to me, the photographer was working only on film, and I was just like, oh. I have such appreciation for your aesthetic purity. This is such a pain in the ass. Oh my God.
Right. I love film. I have tons. My refrigerator is full of film, but like I'm not
actual refrigerator full of film. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, but I'm not exclusively film.
Right.
Somehow I'm more pure or something because I only shoot analog. As an artist.
Yeah, well, and that's not. To be clear, like it's not. That was not a critique or a nostalgic sort of projection either. It was just simply an observation that.
No, I think AI is I think it's an incredible tool in the same way that, even though I suck at it, but like when Photoshop came along, Photoshop like revolutionized design,
Yeah.
And most of the early stuff that was done on Photoshop was just terrible. Just like the early stuff that's being done on AI right now is garbage.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, to see like where can we take this? How can we build worlds this way? And, it's just another it's another brush to put into the toolbox.
Yeah. And so I'm interested, as somebody who has sort of has a curatorial worldview in some respects and has this really strong community or maybe a natural inclination to build community. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm projecting, but I wonder to what extent you're operating in that universe with other people. You know what I mean? Like, is it just Aaron at night after everybody goes to sleep, messing around with ChatGPT and DALL-E, or is it, like the Hollywood AI meetup type thing, or
right? No, I screw around with it a little bit on my own, so that I have like the most rudimentary knowledge of how it works. But professionally, I'm a big collaborator.
Okay.
So I work with people who specialize in AI.
Okay, got it.
Help me develop things for projects or films or videos or whatever we're trying to do.
Got it.
I work with people who really know what they're doing, but I think it's important as an artist to at least understand like the basics of the language, so that you can speak the language. But there are like, I mean, come on, let's face it, there are like 21-year-old kids who just can kill it. And like, I'll never be that good, no matter, So like, why not take advantage of that? And get involved?
No, look, 100%. And also it's what keeps you sort of just tapped into the zeitgeist, right? Like understanding, to a certain degree where it's all moving, or where the Overton window has sort of shifted to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I sent you a list of links. I didn't give you a ton of time to review them. I don't know how much you got to dig into them, but I'm curious, like, what jumped out at you from
I
that
never
list
even
of stuff?
saw them.
Oh no, really? Okay. All right. Well,
Did you
in
send them
that
on
case, we could,
email?
yeah, I sent them on
Oh,
email.
I'm sorry. I'm terrible with email. I could do it now if you want.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to scan through while we talk, it's like
Yeah.
this has not been a labored conversation to this point, so I would expect it would not
Okay.
continue to
Oh man,
be.
I'm so sorry. Let me try to find this here.
Don't worry, I'll pull it up and look as well.
Is
And
it?
kind of,
I don't think I got it.
yeah. This, it's to be sort of rife with technical challenges seems to be my lot in life.
Yeah, I'm looking. I'm looking through. I mean, you can just cut all this part out, but I'm looking through everything you sent me, and there's nothing here. Maybe it went into my junk.
All right. Well,
I
let
just have
me.
the invitation.
Okay. Well, so I guess then let's ask a different question while we sort of, operate in the background on this. What do you turn to now for your information, inspiration sort of sources? I'm just
Huh.
interested to know where somebody like you draws from at this point in your life.
Huh. If you asked me the same question this time last year, I probably would have said social media.
Okay.
But I'm much less interested in social media these days. I feel like the algorithms have gotten so good that there's no surprises anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's almost back to like word of mouth, talking to friends, like almost back to how it was when I was like 19. Like that, it's about
Interesting.
talk for me anyway, like talking to other artists, having dinner with people. Have you heard of this? Blah, blah, blah. Back to almost basics, because I feel like when I first got on Instagram, I was constantly being surprised. I don't know, the algorithms. I'm not a tech person, but like the algorithms were like, they still allowed for randomness and surprise.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I get that anymore. Like
Right.
everything's so pinpointed to me that that there's nothing surprises me anymore, because it's all just variations on things that I'm already seeing. Like if you like this and you'll like this, but I'm like, well, if I like this, I don't want to see that again. Show me something I've never seen,
Yeah. Yeah. No, fully. They have sucked.
Like old school.
Yeah. No. I mean, they've sucked the serendipity out of it completely. I think that's right. So to that end, when you're consulting with people, where does that happen? Is that at the production company where you were earlier? Or does that like get the coffee shop? Is that
working on projects? Not so much at the coffee shop, because I'm in LA. I think if I was in New York, maybe that would be
right.
But like,
Yeah, fair enough.
Like, for example, like I spent the last 2 weeks, like over the holidays, I spent the last 2 weeks in Paris, and like I have a bunch of friends there that I haven't seen in years. You know what I mean? Or we communicate through whatever. So, and just like going and having dinner with people. You know what I mean? Or going for coffee, or meeting them in a museum, or doing and just like, what do you? Oh, you don't know that person? Oh, you have to see this person. Oh, check this out. It's really funny, but it's kind of back to that. To this like.
Yeah.
Artist communication, like, and not relying on like a website or a social media or anything to find out what's new,
What's happening. Yeah.
Which is super. I never thought about it before until you asked the question, but it's true.
Well, yeah. I think there are indications that is true for lots of people. I don't know. You may even in some way have interacted with a guy named Sean Monahan, who writes a trend report called 8 Ball, but who is also sort of a conceptual artist and was part of K-Hole, the team that did the Normcore report back in the day. But he put out a trend report, which I've talked a bunch about, which is, or I have spent a bunch of time thinking about anyway, where he says we are moving into the live player era, which is a little bit like it's a cousin to the kind of analog insistence that we just mentioned a minute ago, but it's the idea that essentially people are going to drop out of these virtual and social streams and just take part in information experience in the real world, that not even that the real world becomes the moment of sort of creation and then social becomes the syndication, but rather that there is the live moment and there is not the digital moment.
Right.
And it's so yeah, you're not the first person to, or not the only person to feel it.
Yeah. It's like they've neutered out everything that made social media exciting. They've neutered it out.
Yeah.
To just be, essentially, I guess it's just a cash grab machine, which is, that's the American way. But
well, it's, I think, yes, cash grab machine for a certain few, for sure. But it's just, right. It's also it's a general sort of regression to the mean. It's a flattening of culture.
Yeah.
Generally speaking. And
which opens up opportunities for change and growth, which is 100%. Great.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I mean, people then, if the graph is, broadly flat, those of us who are sort of spikes, however big or small, there's an interesting opportunity for us to poke up through the flat line. Well, that's interesting. So, and it sort of brings me to a question about, you may have the list now if you want to scan, but it brings me to the question of kind of what you are doing now on a minute-to-minute basis to satisfy both that artistic curiosity and the sort of polymathic approach to stuff, right? When we talked earlier, you were at a production studio, so presumably that's writing, directing, show running, whatever the case may be is.
Film and commercial production.
Got it.
This is an incredible list, and asked me to go through this. You know what I mean?
Well, as I say to everybody, the brief with the newsletter is just read the headlines. I'm not asking you to read all of the articles. But I started Aaron, just to give you a little context. I started this
I'll speak on this one. Herman Miller's brand refresh is a masterclass in timeless design. First of all, Herman Miller deserves to be thrown into the garbage heap of history forever. It's like the worst.
Oh wow, this is
horrible furniture. It was made for public schools and jails. Like, come on, people.
We're okay. Agree to disagree on some of that, shall we say? But I did think that story was sort of obsequious and silly, especially coming from a blog, like a newsletter called Creative Block that is ostensibly like a design review. It just because the Herman Miller, the refresh is fine, but it's probably historically accurate, and the people that worked on it probably thought long and hard about it, but it doesn't do a whole lot. It's a little bit like the all of the conversions back to Helvetica that the fashion houses went under a few years ago.
Yeah,
to me,
it's like it's make furniture great again. You know what I mean? It's like it's the furniture equivalent of MAGA.
Oh, come on, that's too much. That's too much
for a more timeless, more simple time.
Yeah,
when the races stayed in their place.
Well, I suppose, and I think the thing that's interesting to me about that is that, and funny enough, like you're hitting on a vein that we've talked about on this show previously. I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Valenti and Ghostly International.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Sam is a friend. He's a fascinating dude. He's been on the show, but he when I asked him, he with Ghostly, has built like an ecosystem, which is artists, it's music, it's publishing, it's producers, it's graphic design, it's physical products, there's digital solutions, all this sort of stuff. And when I was asking him about building that ecosystem, he said, I was really inspired by Herman Miller, the Herman Miller Company, because when it was founded, it was essentially created as a community, like as a town where all of the stuff from Herman Miller would be created. And I think there's, notwithstanding the eventual use in public schools and prisons and so on and so forth, the
Vietnam War. I mean, they were huge manufacturers of gliders and weapons for the Department.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Huge client of theirs. Yeah,
interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Well, and that gets to that sort of gets to the end of the arc, which is sort of weird, which is that the foundation is so sort of wholesome in a certain respect, right? If you want to think of that as wholesome, and the output is so venerated, but now the new sort of ownership under Miller Knoll sort of leads you inevitably back to the flattening,
right?
And the rebrand maybe figures into that a little bit.
I just read the headline, so I'll click on that and see what the rebrand looks like. But
I mean, it looks exactly as you'd expect it to.
Yeah, I mean, there were some beautiful pieces of design, and they hired some really interesting designers. It's not like a total slam on it, but it's just like, I don't know, man. It's really just like the Brady Bunch. I mean, Ozzie and Harriet, like, like family values, Christian family, like it's just everything about Herman Miller is just, it's horrible,
Aaron, I have to say, I mean, especially because, sorry, on that podcast you talked about Mike Mills, the director, Mike Mills, giving you permission to be it's like basically to say like it's okay to be a polymath kind of thing. And I associate Mike and that scene with the rise of mid-century modernism in a very specific way.
Yeah, Charles and Ray Eames, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you distinguish in that regard. You're distinguishing between the designers and the conglomerate.
Yeah.
Then. Okay. Gotcha.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The Eames, I mean, they had their issues as well, but they did a lot of work that was outside of the professional or manufacturing world. They worked in exhibitions, they worked in lectures, they worked in experimental film. They were very, very well rounded. Their furniture output was just one part of their output, But Herman Miller, they're just a furniture company, like.
Well, okay, so playing off of that, then this takes me back to the conversation I was having with Sam, and this idea of sort of inspiration or I don't know what, like idols is probably too strong a word, but like who have you looked at and gone, that's an archetype that I want to aspire to, or like you know what I mean? Like who's been your role model or role models?
The person who probably, at least early in my career, was Malcolm McLaren.
Oh yeah, sure.
Sex Pistols, Bow Wow Wow, Adamant, and then his solo work too with like Bound and Butterfly and Duck Rock, and then he also worked with Vivienne Westwood on developing all the fashion around punk, and the CBGB's moment that you were talking about in New York, they had their equivalent on King's Road in the late 70s in London with with British punk, and then McLaren moved to LA and started getting into films. Granted, not successfully, but but he was the first person who I read about, like when I was like a teenager, who I was like, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want, and as long as you can pull it off, it's legit. You know?
It is. It's funny to point back to a mutual acquaintance of ours. I cite Steve Powers' book, The Art of Getting Over, all the time, not because I care much about it as like a deep history of graffiti, as like the way that he wrote it, but just like the sentiment of that title and the sentiment of that like aspiration is. I find it so attractive, and I find it in people that I think are the most interesting. So I get that completely. And McLaren is an amazing example of that. Like literally,
incredible.
Just like it's here, I can do it. Why not?
Yeah, and in the few short years when he was really active, I mean, the amount of cultural influence that he had is huge.
Yeah,
huge. So he was the first person that I looked at, and I was like, oh yeah, you can do that. But then it was Mills who kind of really drove it home, because I knew him. I didn't know Malcolm. Malcolm McLaren was like a deity, and Mills was like the guy who I was drinking a 40 with.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. It's funny. As you were talking about McLaren, particularly moving to LA later, it occurred to me, and you have, at various points gone on to mix and mingle with huge names in the culture, as far as I'm concerned. I wondered if at any point you had ever crossed paths with McLaren and had been able to say like,
No,
hey.
no. One of my biggest regrets, for some strange reason, it makes no sense to me because so many people that I know also knew him and were friendly with him. So it would have made sense that we would have met at some point over the years, but we never, it never happened, which is,
Yeah.
maybe for the best. Sometimes maybe it's for the best you don't meet your idols,
That's what they always say. That's what they always say. I don't know. I think the only idol I ever met who disappointed me was, or let me down in that way, was Liam Gallagher. But then I realized from Oasis, then I realized that all you have to do is just let Liam be the center of attention. Right. As long as you're not trying to talk to Liam, you're just letting Liam go.
Right.
He's
everything's
perfect.
Cool. Yeah.
He's perfect. I would imagine that's got to be a particular skill of yours, or alternately, maybe even a sort of an anti-skill, which would make you compelling in a different way, which is to be sympathetic to and sort of instantly understand the needs or the métier or the vernacular of artists. Is that a fair thing, do you think?
Yeah. I find that at any level, if I'm talking to like a little graffiti writer kid who thinks he's all that, or if I'm talking to like somebody who's world famous, I always try to engage on the fact that we're all artists and we're all feeling the same things, that your level in society or in the echelon of creativity or success or whatever has no bearing on how you feel inside about being an artist. And I've found that if you approach people strictly on that level of, what are you thinking about right now? What are you making? Was that hard? Like these kinds of questions, really like technical questions almost, or like emotional questions. I find that like everyone will engage, if I start asking like, how does it feel to be famous? You know what I mean? Or,
what was Jennifer Lawrence like?
You know what? Most people ask questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that is that I love the idea of the asking technical questions as a means to get to more instant emotional connection, because it seems illogical, right?
Yeah, it's like it's talking shop, right? So it's like, oh, they talk shop, because then it's like casual. It doesn't, the process never changes. It's like from the lowest rung to the highest rung, the process is the process. It doesn't change. Right. So
yeah, well, it's also I guess a way it's a sort of a thing. It's a cultural cue. It's a a community cue to basically say, hey, we are of the same universe. It's when we were kids, you could walk through the mall and you knew who skateboarders were because only one person had a particular kind of shoe or had shoes that looked a particular way, right? Like you just knew. Yeah. And you also knew that like those people were likely to be all right, and you had a shared environment. And but it is a trick to be able to bring that to human real agnostic of community human relationship. That's fascinating.
Yeah, but it's it's not a tactic though. I don't want it to come off like that somehow.
Oh no. I don't take it as such.
Really, what I want to talk about. You know what I mean? So it's not some kind of like manipulation. It's like, oh no, that's actually, I'm going to learn more about you from that conversation than any other question I could ask you.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you? I don't actually know what. Speaking of questions to ask, I don't know what the next question I was going to ask is. We'll have to make that up as we go. All right. So, as you scan through, is there anything else? I'm going to pick a couple of things that.
Okay. Yeah, you picked them out. That's just. I mean, I'm really impressed with that list, but it's just too crazy. Wow.
Well, okay. So one thing that you said. Oh, okay. So here, we'll do two. We just talked about Steve Powers a second ago. One
Yeah,
of the
less.
links, which is in the culturation section, is his post about the end of the beginning. There was sort of the chronicle of Espo's art world, the
Hmm.
storefront that he had in he and his team had in downtown
Yeah,
Brooklyn.
I got it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice, and Steve has such a way with words, generally speaking, that it makes for a very pleasant read. And of course, for me, having visited many times, it's a trip down memory lane, so to speak. But
Yeah.
what I wondered about from
Go.
yours, say again.
No, go on. I want to hear what your question is.
Well, so you are. I think one of the other things that characterizes you is that you've worked with artists that are intrinsically like multimodal, multi-platform as it relates to the high low of their output, right? Like it because they come out of skate or graffiti, there is always this commodified element close by to the artistic expression. And I wondered what your take on things like Espo's Art World or the Pop Shop before it, or any of these other sort of third places is, where art exists as an expression and a community builder or a means of relation, but also as a commodity for sale.
Right.
Is that like getting to the end, the inevitable end of what art means to people generally by presenting it in an accessible fashion, or is it something else? Does that question make
I
sense?
mean, I think I know where you're going with this. Something I think about a lot, and I think doesn't come up that often in the art dialogues, because the art dialogues tend to be controlled by people with MFAs in a certain kind of of practice, is that there are multiple economies in art. Um, there is like the blue chip economy, the Art Basel economy. There's the street art economy. Um, they don't overlap, almost never.
Right.
Um, some would say that the street art economy is actually larger than the blue chip economy. Don't tell the blue chippers that, though. You
I'm not telling nobody
know?
nothing.
Okay. um, it doesn't get the headlines, but there's more. And
Yeah.
then there's like then there are like small, like there's like even in terms of outsider art, outsider art is a huge economy that relates not to the street art community, the street art economy, or the blue chip economy,
Sure.
and a whole nother economy that's in the multi millions. And so I think that like sometimes too much focus is put on like one, like this is art, and that's basically because a certain group of MFA or PhD holders have degrees and control the narrative there.
Yeah, for sure.
But there are multiple ways of expressing art, and I feel like graffiti in particular, and like what someone like Steve has done, and what Keith was trying to do as well, was like the true democratization of art, where art is not something that's reserved for the elite,
Right.
for them to hide their money in, to launder their money or whatever it is they use the artwork for. It was to allow people of all walks of life and all levels of income to enjoy in the process of interacting with art, and that's what graffiti's always been about. So like something like Espo's Art World is like the perfect manifestation of that democracy.
Yeah.
You know?
I think so too. Do you think
Totally
it? Do
true
you?
to what graffiti is,
Yeah. Well, okay. So to that end, then the other thing that graffiti, at least on the street, inevitably is ephemeral, right?
Yeah.
It goes away at a certain point.
Yes. So
And
does the bottom of a
and
skateboard.
say again?
So does the bottom of a skateboard.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's the question though. I mean, do you feel like literal business logistics, paying the rent type thing notwithstanding, does a concept like Espo's art world need, or a legend, or whatever the case may be, does it need to have a shelf life, or is it stronger with a shelf life because the end emphasizes the power? I wonder.
I don't believe so. I know of lots of collectors who bought things from us back in the day who are quite pleased with the with the current cost of those pieces. The market value has gone sky high, but I don't believe that 95% of the people who purchased work from us between 1992 and 1996 had any aspirations of economy or of any investment aspirations in buying that work. They're buying that work because they wanted to live with it. They wanted to have it in their home or on the wall of their office or whatever it was. It was, and you could say the same people throughout history who have collected the abstract expressionists or, even the early pop collectors. They weren't buying it because they thought this was going to be worth money,
Sure.
It's
I wonder
who buy it for that,
Yeah. I wonder,
third bus in, who buy it for the money,
Sure. No, I guess the question is maybe slightly restated a little bit differently, though. Is like, does it need to, in order for it to have true lore,
right,
and to have true sort of historical staying power, does it need to come to an end and have a finite sort of?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. And, it could end up in the garbage and be just as important, It doesn't need to be saved in glassine and, in temperature controlled storage. It could have just been thrown away when you moved,
Right.
Like,
well,
like
or it could have been a performance or whatever the case is, which sort of brings us back in a certain way to that question of like, when you're in the room, do you know that history is being made?
Right. But I will say that that like this was not premeditated, but we had to close the gallery for multiple reasons, mostly financial, and I wasn't really happy about that happening. That wasn't
sure.
I had invested a decade of my life, and all these artists had invested all their time. I wasn't particularly excited that we had to close our doors, but had we stayed open, it would have. The fact that we closed is what made it important. I think that if we were still there, slugging, Gons and Espo and, 25 years in business, you know what I mean? Or, I don't think it would be the same. I think the fact that it was gone and could kind of go into the collective memory helped to build that legacy for not just the gallery, but for all of the artists and all that whole scene.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, it certainly, it limits the club at a certain membership forever and sort of says,
well put.
I was there. I was there.
But well, the other, that's just that's the way the cookie crumbled.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah. And well, it is certainly, it's a scene with incredible lore and one, I encourage everybody to go check out. The other question I wanted to ask you about, or the other story I wanted to point out was another thing that I heard you say on that the We're Together podcast was that you're not a fan of digital art, and there is a story down here about that Quartz was asking, is there any potential left for the metaverse economy? Now, I wouldn't say bullish on digital art, but I think there's something. I think there are as yet uncrossed frontiers available in it that could make it pretty compelling. And I'm interested what it is about it that doesn't get you.
Okay. Again, this kind of like ping pongs back to our conversation about AI.
Sure.
The artists who have embraced digital art are tech guys who think they can draw, you know? You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
You know, but that makes sense because they're the guys developing it. You know what I mean? And they're at best illustrators, but I think that even that is being generous to say that they're illustrators. I think that that the talent and the technology have yet to merge in a way that truly like takes advantage or creates value there. I think that especially with the whole NFT thing that was going on, and Burble or whatever these Gerbils, whoever these people's names were. Beebles, yeah.
Beeple? Yeah, we love Beeple.
Yeah, like
good old Beeple.
I made a piece of art every day for a year. It's like every artist does that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
It's not like you're not so special, but to tech people who only live in that world, they're like, wow, that's so cool, that's so clever. Oh my gosh, and it's just that the talent hasn't matched the technology yet. And so that's my criticism of it.
Sure.
Not necessarily the medium. It's just that the people who are working in digital art natively at this point are not artists, I don't think.
Sure. Can you think
they're entrepreneurs.
Yeah, the entrepreneurs. Can you think of a scene that is comparable in that regard? Like, you could argue, to go back to graffiti, that the earliest forms of graffiti were terrible aesthetically, compared to what is possible, or where artists have gotten to themselves now. I mean, do you see any sort of analogs?
Yeah, it's just like the right person with the right mind has to understand what's going on there and take advantage of it and revolutionize it. But you have it's like saying like there's a paint company called Liquitex, right? They're like one of the oldest paint companies in America. They do acrylic paint, oil paint. They, like any art store you go to, they have a giant Liquitex aisle. That's like the probably the biggest paint brand in America for artist paint. What's happening in digital art is if like the people at Liquitex were making all the art, you know what I mean? It's like, no, you're the tool. You're not the artist.
Yeah, fair enough. So digital art needs its Duchamp. It needs its Duchamp.
Yeah. Also, when you talk about the metaverse, I do think that there are more opportunities for things to happen in the quote unquote alternate realities or in the metaverse than trying to manifest that digital art in 3D, in our world. I don't see it working as well in this world. I see it working in the meta worlds or in other worlds, digital worlds.
Right. Well, there's also this
there.
Yeah. Well, and there's also this forced designation of creative expression as capital A art, and the need to sort of situate it as capital A art that requires a level of apology for the state that it's in, I suppose.
Right. But yeah, when I was speaking with Ben and Ione, it wasn't that I think that digital art is horrible and will never be good and should be like banished to the graveyard of history. It's just that like it's just not being used correctly yet.
It hasn't impressed you to this point. Yeah, look, I think your summation of it not having yet synthesized talent and technology in a compelling form is not. I don't think there's anything off base about that, and I also don't think there's anything sort of damning about that. It's like it's
the way things work. Yeah, it's the way things work. You can't expect a programmer to do it all. You know what I mean? They're different jobs.
Sure,
they're different jobs.
Interesting. All right. Well, so speaking of different jobs, we've got a minute or so left in our hour-long conversation.
Okay.
You are. As we've touched on, you do lots of different stuff, right? And the most recent job I saw you do was on Instagram, where you read, or you began to start to read one of the poems from the book inside a cardboard box that was supposed to stand for the Horseshoe Bar in New York.
Yeah.
What is like? How do you delineate between your various jobs at this point? I mean, are you segmented 2 hours here, 2 hours there, or does it all flow together, or do you 1 month on, 1 year off type thing?
It depends on what I'm on deadline for.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
That gets a little bit more love, if it's due next week. But yeah, I try to it's not like I have a schedule on the wall that says 2 hours of this and 2 hours of that, but I tend to I'll write in the morning, mostly right out of bed. My brain is at its best in terms of pure creative expression in the realm of the written word. It's very direct, like when I'm sort of half asleep.
Interesting.
But only for an hour and a half, and then I start to lose it. The emails start coming in or whatever, and so I lose that, and then I'll usually work on paintings for a couple of hours, and then I'll do correspondence, for a little while, and then the afternoons are free. It's really about what's most pressing.
Okay.
Whatever's most pressing is what I kind of spend my afternoons on.
Got it. And
the morning is innovation, and the afternoons are, getting things done.
Yeah. It's I in the past 3 years that I've been consulting and moving around between projects, I have a very hard time day partying, which is why I'm always interested to know how people who I admire do it. I have yet to land on my magic formula yet, but one of these days I'll keep taking cues, and one of these days I'll learn.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of what feels right for me is in the morning, I feel like my brain is more open and more pure. That's not the time to write emails. That's that's when I'll mine the creative depths and see what's going on in there, and then around 11 or whatever, then I'm okay. I can start writing people, and then
doing the correspondence and working on all that stuff. Yeah, it's amazing. I think I'm the opposite. I think it's nighttime when everything else is sort of quiet is when things turn on for me, and I go, oh yeah, it'd be interesting to explore that.
Yeah. Well, it used to be like that before I had a kid, before I became a father. Now I'm so tired at night, I can't.
I'm getting to the opposite end of that, where it's like my son is a senior in high school, my daughter's a freshman. They could basically live totally independently of us, and so it's like,
my daughter's 9, so she's 8, turning 9. So she's still younger.
Right in it. Cool. Yeah. Well, Aaron, listen, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time and for
it's been too long.
I know. Well, listen, let's use this as a reason to be in closer touch.
For sure.
But I so appreciate the opportunity to kind of explore your brain a little bit and understand your points of view. Like I said, you've been such an inspiration for me over the course of time from afar, and so it's an honor. So I don't know what else to say about that. But everybody, if you should please check out Aaron's new book of poetry, which are called Blackout Poems, which is on Hat and Beard Press. There is alleged merch, maybe a few pieces left. I might have just bought the last medium, but anyway,
I saw that you did. Yeah,
I
think we're out
on Aaron's website.
We are making more.
And Aaron updates with products and artworks and all kinds of weird vintage sales from time to time. And then beyond that, like the creative output is kind of amazing. And the lore, as we've said, of alleged is unbelievable. So please go check all that stuff out and you will be better for it. But Aaron, thank you again for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. Happy New Year.
All right, man. Likewise, you too.
Yeah, take care.